The Lagos High Court was filled with the hum of murmured voices and the clicking of cameras that morning. Remy Alade, dressed in a fitted navy suit that screamed success, stepped out of his black Range Rover like a man arriving at his coronation. By his side was Tasha, a young woman in a bright red dress that accentuated her pregnancy. She clutched his arm proudly as they entered the courthouse, her chin slightly lifted, her lips curved into a confident smile. Inside the courtroom, eyes turned, some in pity, others in disbelief, toward the far end where Kosi, his lawful wife, sat in quiet stillness. Her simple cream gown contrasted sharply against the flamboyance of Tasha's outfit. Her hair was pulled neatly into a bun, her posture calm, unbroken. Beside her sat their 5-year-old daughter, Mira, clutching a small teddy bear and looking around curiously, unaware of the storm swirling around her family. When Remy caught sight of them, his smile deepened. He whispered something to his lawyer, who chuckled quietly, then placed a reassuring hand on Tasha's back. To him, today was not about justice, it was a performance, a final act of dominance. He wanted the world to see him triumphant, to see his wife small and defeated. But Kosi's silence unsettled him. She didn't glare, didn't cry, didn't even look embarrassed. She simply stared ahead, her face unreadable, her hand resting on Myra's back protectively. Her calmness was a language Remy didn't understand anymore. It was a kind of silence that carried weight, like the pause before a thunderclap. Even Tasha noticed it. "She looks too quiet," she murmured under her breath. And for the first time that morning, Remy felt a flicker of discomfort crawl through his pride. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but already the air was thick with judgment. People whispered, pointing at Tasha's swollen belly, then back at Kosi's small frame and the little girl by her side. Mira tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mummy, why is Daddy holding that lady's hand?" Kosi forced a soft smile. "Because, my love, sometimes people forget where they belong." Mira tilted her head in confusion, her innocence cutting through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. As the judge's gavel finally struck to call the court to order, Remy leaned back with a smirk, his ego settled. In his mind, it was already over. What he didn't know was that the woman he thought he had broken had already begun rewriting the ending quietly, carefully, and without mercy. Long before courtrooms and betrayal, there was laughter, the kind that filled tiny spaces with warmth. In those early days, Remy and Kosi lived in a cramped one-room apartment in Surulere, with peeling paint and a window that leaked during the rainy season. Yet, that little space was paradise because love lived there. Kosi worked double shifts as a receptionist, and Remy hustled endlessly with business proposals that rarely got replies. When baby Mira arrived, she became their reason to smile after long days of disappointment. They would sit together at night, with Kosi rocking Mira to sleep while Remy scribbled ideas on notepads under the dim glow of a rechargeable lamp. "One day I'll give you everything," he used to whisper, and Kosi, exhausted but hopeful, would nod. "Just don't lose yourself on the way there." When success finally came, it arrived like a storm, loud, sudden, and consuming. Remy landed a printing contract with a large corporate firm, and within a year, he was driving a car and talking about expanding. Kosi celebrated him with all her heart. She cooked his favorite meals, ironed his clothes, and prayed for him every morning before he left for work. She didn't mind the long nights or the missed dinners. She believed he was building their dream. But slowly, the laughter changed its tone. Remy began sleeping later and coming home less. He started using words like networking, clients, and image. Kosi's calls went unanswered more often. Even Mira began noticing. "Daddy doesn't watch cartoons with me anymore," she'd say, and Kosi would lie gently. "He's working hard for us." Deep down, however, she knew something sacred was slipping away. The shift was subtle but cruel. Remy stopped looking at Kosi the same way. The man who once couldn't stand to see her cry now made her tears look inconvenient. He became colder, his smile mechanical, his affection forced. The home that once glowed with simplicity became a house filled with silence and screens. Kosi tried to bridge the gap. She planned dinners, surprised him at work, but each attempt met a wall. "Kosi, please stop acting like a village woman," he snapped one night. I have a lot on my plate. That was the first time he made her feel small. Yet she stayed not because she was weak, but because she remembered the man he used to be, and because Mira still looked at him with the pure, unbroken faith of a child who believed her father hung the moon. The first time Kosi smelled perfume that wasn't hers on his shirt, she didn't speak. She washed it quietly and folded it back in his drawer. When he came home late again, she asked if he'd eaten. He said yes, without looking at her. Weeks passed, and she became an expert at pretending not to notice. But pretending doesn't heal. One Friday night, her heart made the decision her mind was afraid to voice. Remy had claimed he'd be meeting clients at a hotel in Victoria Island, and something inside her whispered, go. She didn't plan to catch him. She just wanted to see, with her own eyes, what silence had already confessed. When she arrived, the hotel lobby glittered with wealth, polished floors, laughter echoing from the bar. And there he was, Remy, her husband, her once dreaming partner, sitting comfortably with a young woman in a red dress, his hand resting possessively on hers. They were laughing the way she and he used to. For a brief moment, Kosi stood frozen, her fingers trembling on her purse strap. She walked toward them, calm but dying inside. When he noticed her, his smile vanished. Kosi, this is not, he began. She cut him off softly, placing his forgotten wallet on the table. You left this at home, she said, her tone as calm as still water. Then she turned to the woman and added, enjoy your meeting. And with that, she walked away. Driving home, her chest burned. She wanted to scream, to cry, to break something. But when she saw little Mira asleep on the couch, clutching her teddy bear, all she could do was kneel beside her and weep silently. The next morning, she prepared breakfast as usual. When Remy came home hours later, he began his usual lies. She's a client. You're overreacting. You're too emotional. Kosi didn't argue. She simply said, all right, and went back to feeding their daughter. That night, she realized something painful. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And she was done fighting for someone who had already chosen to leave. It happened a month later. Kosi came home early from work, hoping to surprise Mira with a special dinner. But the gate was open, and the house felt strangely alive. She could hear soft music playing upstairs and laughter, a woman's laughter. Mira was in the living room watching cartoons, innocent and happy. Mummy, Daddy's upstairs, she said casually. Kosi's heart stopped. She walked up the stairs slowly, and there, standing by the mirror in her robe, spraying perfume, was Tasha. Their eyes met briefly. Tasha froze, realizing who she was, and then tried to stammer an excuse. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were home. But Kosi didn't respond. She simply turned around and walked downstairs. That evening, Remy returned to find the house quiet. On the bed, his wife had placed the robe neatly folded, and beside it, a note written in her gentle handwriting. You both looked comfortable. Don't stain my child's peace. He stood there for several minutes, the words hitting harder than any argument could. He didn't apologize. He didn't even mention it. But from that night onward, he began sleeping elsewhere, partly out of guilt, partly out of pride. Kosi said nothing. She made breakfast every morning, prepared Mira for school, and kept the house running as though nothing had changed. Only her eyes told the story, eyes that used to sparkle now dulled like old glass. Mira noticed too. Mummy, why doesn't Daddy eat with us anymore? She asked one night. Kosi's voice trembled as she replied, he's eating where he feels full, baby. Mira frowned, confused but trusting. As Kosi tucked her into bed, she realized that her silence had become armor, and if she didn't protect her peace soon, Myra's innocence would be the next casualty. From that night, Kosi began to gather strength the way she used to gather hope, quietly, in pieces. By the following month, the world knew what Kosi had been enduring privately. Photos of Remy and Tasha flooded social media, matching outfits, dinner dates, captions like my king, my world. Friends began sending screenshots with pitying emojis. Even family members called, asking her to end the shame. But Kosi didn't respond. She deactivated her social media and focused on what mattered, Myra's peace. She began walking her daughter to school every morning and humming soft hymns on the way back. Her silence baffled everyone. They expected a scandal, a scene, or at least a public outburst. Instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Time knows how to speak." Meanwhile, Remy's arrogance grew. He stopped sending money regularly, insisting that Kosi should learn independence. Tasha pushed him to finalize the divorce, taunting that Kosi looked desperate. But they mistook silence for defeat. What they didn't know was that Kosi had already begun protecting herself legally. She visited her lawyer, Mrs. Bello, with a folder full of documents, company registration papers, property deeds, and proof that every major investment was tied to her name. "He used my inheritance to build everything," she said softly. Mrs. Bello studied the papers and smiled. "Then he built his castle on your land." At home, Mira would sit at the dining table, drawing pictures of Mommy, Daddy, and me. Kosi would stroke her hair and smile sadly. "Maybe one day, baby," she whispered. Deep down, she knew the marriage was already dead, but she wanted her daughter to grow up, knowing her mother never screamed, never fought dirty, never begged. She wanted Mira to understand that dignity is the quietest revenge. And as she watched the rain fall that night, Kosi whispered to herself, "Let him smile. One day, that smile will choke him." The morning was humid, the kind of Lagos heat that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel like memory. Remy arrived unannounced, parking his SUV in front of the compound. The sound of his horn sent Mira running, her small legs flying toward the gate, her teddy bear forgotten on the couch. "Daddy," she screamed with pure joy, wrapping her arms around his leg. For the first time in months, Kosi saw her daughter's smile stretch fully, her laughter ringing like the past had momentarily returned. Remy carried Mira in his arms, spinning her slightly, and Kosi watched from the doorway, silent, her heart torn between relief and restraint. "You've grown taller," he said, forcing a smile. Mira nodded proudly. "Can I follow you home, Daddy?" she asked innocently, her voice laced with hope so pure it could have softened stone. But Remy hesitated. His eyes flickered between Kosi's calm expression and the car parked outside, the same one Tasha often rode in. "Not today, baby," he said softly, brushing a strand of her hair. "Stay with Mummy for now. We're trying to settle something." Mira blinked, confused. "Settle what?" "I can help you settle it," she said brightly. The innocence in her words cracked something in Kosi. She turned away quickly, pretending to fix Myra's sandals, her throat tightening as tears gathered in silence. Remy handed the girl a small bag of chocolates, kissed her forehead, and mumbled, "I'll come for you soon." Then he turned to Kosi and muttered, "Please, let's make this easy." She didn't reply. He left. The sound of the gate closing felt like a verdict. That night, Mira didn't eat much. She placed the chocolates beside her teddy bear and whispered, "He said he'll come soon." Kosi tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead, but when she turned off the light, she stood by the door, watching her daughter sleep, small, peaceful, and unaware that the man she adored was slipping farther away. In the quiet, Kosi made a promise to herself. "If he won't protect this child's peace, I will." That was the moment she truly began to detach her heart, not out of bitterness, but out of survival. She was learning that love sometimes means accepting the ruin without letting it destroy your voice. Weeks passed, and the air around their lives changed again, heavier, more public, more humiliating. The internet became Tasha's theater. Every few days she posted a photo, her hand in Remy's, her glowing baby bump, captions like "Building forever with my king," or "My joy is finally legal." Gossip blogs ran wild, spinning stories about Kosi being bitter and barren, even though the truth sat at home, a little girl named Mira sketching rainbows while her father played house elsewhere. Kosi saw the posts once, then deleted every app on her phone. "They don't deserve my attention," she told herself, even as her stomach knotted in shame. She shielded Mira from it all, but children sense pain even when words are hidden. One Saturday morning, Mira walked into the living room holding Kosi's tablet. "Mummy, who's that lady with Daddy?" she asked, pointing to one of the circulating pictures of Tasha's maternity shoot. Kosi's hand trembled as she took the tablet. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with the softest smile, she replied, "Someone who doesn't know how fire burns until it's too late." Mira frowned, not understanding, but nodded obediently. Later that day, Kosi sat in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly. Her chest hurt, not from anger, but from the loneliness that comes when you realize someone else is now living the life you built. But she also knew something Tasha didn't. She had not only shared Remy's heart once, she had financed his foundation, signed the company papers, built the dream. The empire they flaunted still bore her invisible fingerprints. That night, as thunder rumbled outside, Kosi picked up her diary and wrote. He traded legacy for lust. But time never forgets the one who built. She didn't plan revenge. She planned preservation. She began keeping every document safe, receipts, shares, title deeds. Not out of greed, but out of the quiet wisdom that foresaw collapse. She tucked them into a brown envelope, labeled simply, for Mira. She prayed softly beside it, whispering, God, if I can't change what he's become, let me at least protect what's left of her peace. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, a warning that storms were near. When the legal documents arrived, stamped with the bold letters petition for dissolution of marriage, Kosi felt no shock, only an emptiness she had rehearsed for. The court date was set. Neighbors whispered. Her mother called from Enugu, crying over the phone, Don't let the world laugh at you, Kosi. A woman's dignity is in her home. Kosi's reply was calm. Mama, dignity doesn't live in a place where peace has died. She hung up, went into her bedroom, and folded her clothes carefully into a suitcase, not to move out, but to remind herself that if the time came, she could leave without breaking. That evening, she told Mira gently, Daddy and Mummy will be going to court soon. The little girl tilted her head, puzzled. Are you both going to work? Kosi smiled faintly. Something like that, baby. Meanwhile, Remy was living in a bubble of arrogance. He laughed with his friends at the bar that night, boasting, She's too soft. I'll sign the papers, walk out, and she'll beg to stay in the house. They laughed, raising their glasses to his delusion. Tasha sat beside him, resting her hand on her belly, her smile smug. She should have moved on already, she said. You belong to me now. Remy kissed her hand, feeling powerful, not realizing he was building his own downfall. The man who once begged for favors now acted like a god. Pride had made him blind to the quiet woman collecting evidence in silence. Back home, Kosi met with her lawyer, Mrs. Bello, a seasoned woman with eyes that saw through pretense. She spread out Remy's documents on her desk and smiled. You know what I love about men like him, she said. They always forget who signed the first check. Kosi chuckled softly for the first time in weeks. Let's just keep clean, she said. I want the truth to speak, not anger. That night, after putting Mira to bed, she looked at her reflection in the mirror and whispered, He's walking into his own courtroom, and he thinks it's mine. The first court hearing drew small crowds, journalists, bloggers, curious faces, all eager to witness the humiliation of the once perfect Alida. Tasha arrived first, wearing a fitted peach dress that hugged her pregnancy, her makeup sharp, her perfume strong. She strutted through the hallway like she owned the world. Remy, beside her, wore that same confident smirk, greeting people like a celebrity. Across the hall sat Kosi, dressed in a plain white blouse and beige skirt, holding Myra's tiny hand. The little girl's legs swung from the bench, her crayons scattered on her lap. Mummy, that lady keeps looking at me, she whispered, glancing at Tasha. Kosi leaned close. Ignore her, baby. Not every smile is real. When the session began, Tasha couldn't help herself. She whispered loud enough for others to hear. I hope she learns how to let go. Remy's lawyer tried to intimidate Kosi, listing the assets as if she had no claim. Your client, he said mockingly, has lived off her husband's kindness for years. Mrs. Bello, Kosi's lawyer, smiled faintly. Kindness built with her money, counsel, she replied coolly. The judge raised an eyebrow. Even Remy looked uneasy for a moment. He quickly whispered something to his lawyer, who nodded and changed topics. From the back, a journalist scribbled furiously, sensing a story. Kosi said nothing. Her silence remained her power. Outside the courtroom, while reporters swarmed, Tasha laughed loudly and posed subtly for pictures. They'll see who won, she said, flashing her diamond ring. Mira tugged her mother's skirt, whispering, "Mummy, why is Daddy smiling so much?" Kosi looked at her daughter for a long moment, her eyes tender but cold with resolve. "Because sometimes," she said, "people smile when they don't realize they're walking into a storm." The next court date was scheduled, and as they walked to the car, Mrs. Bello leaned in and whispered, "Let them enjoy the spotlight. The truth always waits for its turn." By the final preliminary hearing, the building itself felt tense, like even the walls were tired of the pride they'd witnessed. That morning, Remy's lawyer approached Kosi in the hallway. His voice was polite but sharp. "Madam, if you're wise, you'll accept whatever settlement is offered. You'll leave with your child's clothes and peace of mind." Kosi's face didn't flinch. "Peace," she said softly, "is the only thing I already own." Then she walked away, her heels echoing against the marble floor like punctuation marks in a story already decided. Behind her, Mira walked quietly, her hand wrapped around her mother's finger, small, trusting, unaware she was walking through history. Inside the courtroom, Remy sat beside Tasha, whispering smugly. They both looked like people celebrating victory before the game began. When Kosi entered, the hush was almost reverent. She carried a brown envelope close to her chest, her lawyer by her side. Tasha smirked and whispered, "Look at her pretending to be strong." But Kosi didn't look at them. She simply sat down, calm as a lake before a storm. Even the judge noticed her composure. The session began with Remy's lawyer listing assets again, claiming that Kosi contributed nothing financially. Mrs. Bello waited patiently for her turn. When court adjourned for the day, the reporters outside rushed toward Kosi for a statement. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about your husband's affair?" one asked. She looked straight at the cameras, her voice gentle but firm. "No comment," she said. "I'll let time speak." As she turned to leave, Mira looked up at her mother and asked, "Mummy, is Daddy still trying to settle something?" Kosi smiled faintly, her heart aching at the echo of innocence. "Yes, baby," she whispered, "but this time will do the settling for him." That evening, she placed a brown envelope on her nightstand and ran her fingers over it like a loaded secret. The stage was set, and the storm she had waited for was finally about to break. The day of the final hearing arrived with the weight of prophecy. Lagos woke early, restless, as though it too was aware something significant would unfold behind those courthouse walls. By 8 a.m., the building was alive with reporters, cameras, and curious strangers. The hum of whispers filled the corridors. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the man who had traded a faithful wife for a mistress, and was now flaunting her during his divorce. Remy arrived first, in a tailored gray suit that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Tasha, beside him, radiated smug confidence, her hand resting protectively on her baby bump. He adjusted his tie and smiled broadly as flashes went off. "Let them see what success looks like," he murmured to her. Across the hall, Kosi stepped out of a quiet car, dressed in a cream blouse and navy skirt, her hair neatly tied back. She held Myra's hand, and the sight of the child, tiny, innocent, dressed in yellow, drew murmurs of sympathy. Yet Kosi's calm was unshaken. She walked as though she was arriving for peace, not war. Inside, the courtroom's air was thick with anticipation. The judge, an elderly man with silver-rimmed glasses, sat poised, his gavel resting beside his hand. Remy's lawyer began with the arrogance of a man who believed the truth was already owned. "My client," he declared, "seeks a clean dissolution of marriage. Mrs. Kosi Alade contributed nothing financially to his empire and has been sustained by his generosity." Laughter rippled quietly from Tasha's side of the room. Kosi remained still, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, one hand resting gently on Myra's shoulder. She didn't speak, she didn't flinch. But Mrs. Bello, her lawyer, smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said she knew something others didn't. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Is the respondent prepared to speak?" he asked. Mrs. Bello rose and said, "Not yet, Your Honor." She prefers to let the petitioner finish his display. A quiet murmur spread through the room, but the judge allowed it. Remy sat back, crossing his legs confidently. He whispered something to Tasha, who chuckled and rubbed her belly. Mira, sitting quietly beside her mother, began to draw with her crayons again, sketching a little house, a sun, and two figures holding hands. She didn't understand the whispers, but she could feel the tension. At one point, she looked at her mother and said softly, "Mummy, why is Daddy talking so loud?" Kosi smiled faintly. "Because some people shout when they're afraid of silence, baby." The courtroom fell quiet, as if her voice had traveled farther than intended. Even the judge glanced up briefly, intrigued. When the session broke for recess, journalists outside reported it differently. Calm wife unmoved as husband and mistress flaunt pride. Tension rises in Lagos courtroom. None of them knew that the most dangerous storms make no noise before they hit. After the recess, the air changed, heavy, electric, watchful. When the judge returned, the chatter died instantly. Mrs. Bello rose gracefully, straightened her jacket, and said, "Your Honor, my client wishes to submit additional evidence." A hush fell over the courtroom. Remy's lawyer looked up, half smirking, certain it was a desperate move. But when Kosi stood, calm and composed, and opened her brown envelope, something in the atmosphere shifted, like the first distant rumble of thunder before a downpour. "These are legal documents, company registration files, bank transfers, and receipts," she began softly. "They prove that the first capital used to start Alade Prince Ltd. came from my personal inheritance, funds wired from my late father's estate into my husband's account 8 years ago." Gasps rippled through the room. Kosi's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Truth, spoken softly, can pierce louder than screams. The judge took the file, flipping through the pages with furrowed brows. "Mr. Alade," he said slowly, "were you aware your company was registered under your wife's financial initiation?" Remy shifted uneasily. "That was a joint effort," he muttered. Mrs. Bello smiled thinly. "Indeed, Your Honor, the joint effort for which my client's name was removed from all records after profitability began." She handed over the original business registration, bearing both names, then the amended version, bearing only his. Even Tasha leaned forward now, her pride unraveling. The courtroom had gone completely silent except for the steady hum of the ceiling fan. The judge exhaled, tapping his pen. "These are legally binding documents, Mr. Alade. Do you contest their authenticity?" Remy's throat went dry. I'll need time to review them," he stammered. Kosi turned to the judge and said quietly, "I don't want revenge, Your Honor. I only want protection for my daughter's future and for the dignity of my years." The judge studied her for a long time, then nodded slowly. Meanwhile, Remy's expression began to crumble, the mask of arrogance slipping to reveal panic. Tasha, realizing what this meant, leaned close to him and whispered harshly, "You said it was all yours." But he didn't reply. He couldn't. His lawyer shifted nervously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. From her seat, little Mira tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mummy, are we done?" she whispered. Kosi smiled faintly. "Almost, baby. The truth is finally speaking." Reporters outside who had expected a scandalous defeat instead wrote headlines like, "Wife turns tables with evidence. Husband's empire built on her funds." For the first time that day, Remy realized that pride doesn't look like power when exposed. It looks like nakedness. As the evidence piled up, so did the silence. It was a kind of silence that humbles even the proud. Remy's hands began to tremble slightly as he stared at the papers before him. The transfers, the signatures, the legal seals that bore dates he had long forgotten. In his mind, he replayed those early days. The night Kosi sold her jewelry. The morning she waited for him to come home, the meal she packed when he had nothing. He remembered everything, but too late. The courtroom was no longer his playground. It had become his mirror. Tasha sat beside him, shifting uncomfortably, her confidence melting like wax in the heat of truth. Her hand, which had rested proudly on her belly moments ago, now fidgeted with the hem of her dress. "Remy," she hissed under her breath, "say something." "But what do you say when lies have run out of air?" Across the room, Kosi sat silently. She wasn't smiling, but her stillness was louder than celebration. She had no interest in humiliating him. This was not revenge. This was revelation. Mrs. Bello handed the judge one final document, proof that the title deed for their house, the one Tasha had boasted about online, was registered solely in Kosi's name. The courtroom gasped again. One journalist scribbled furiously, "Court shock. Wife owns mansion. Husband just a tenant in his own home." Even the bailiff's face twitched in disbelief. The judge leaned back slowly. "Mr. Lade," he said, "it appears your wife not only contributed, but owns the foundation of your success." Remy's lips parted, but no sound came. In the front row, Mira watched him with innocent confusion. Her father, once larger than life, now small and silent. "Mummy," she whispered softly, "is Daddy in trouble?" Kosi turned to her, eyes soft but firm. "He's learning a lesson, baby, one that some men never finish." The hearing ended abruptly, with the judge requesting a short adjournment to review documents further. As they left the courtroom, flashes of cameras blinded them. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Lade, how do you feel? Is this revenge? What message do you have for women like you?" Kosi kept walking, Myra's small hand firmly in hers. "No comment," she said quietly. But inside her heart, she whispered, "Peace doesn't roar. It reveals." Behind them, Remy stood in the corridor, watching them leave. For the first time in his adult life, he felt powerless, not because someone took from him, but because someone finally reminded him who had given everything. The next day, Tasha's composure crumbled completely. As the hearing resumed, her nerves were stretched thin. She kept touching her neck, her lips trembling as whispers followed her every move. Reporters now called her the mistress who mocked destiny. When the judge reconvened, Remy tried to act calm, but his lawyer had lost all confidence. Mrs. Bello stood again, this time summarizing Kosi's contributions. "Your Honor, my client did not come to destroy her husband. She came to reclaim her peace." The judge nodded gravely, his tone colder now. "The court recognizes Mrs. Alade's financial and emotional investment. The petitioner's conduct, meanwhile, shows irresponsibility and public humiliation." The final blow was near. Tasha, who had once felt powerful, now sat like a ghost, pale and trembling. When the ruling began, the courtroom felt like a church in mourning. The judge announced that Kosi would retain full custody of Mira, as well as majority ownership of the business assets and family properties. "This court cannot reward betrayal," he said firmly. Remy's head dropped. Cameras flashed like lightning. Tasha covered her face, her breathing shallow. Suddenly, she stood up abruptly, shouting, "This isn't fair." "You said she was finished, Remy." Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. The judge struck the gavel. "Silence, madam." But it was too late. Her body swayed. A small scream escaped her lips, and she collapsed. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Remy rushed toward her instinctively, his arrogance gone, replaced by panic. Paramedics were called. For 10 tense minutes, no one breathed. Kosi didn't move. She sat quietly, Myra's small head resting on her arm, her fingers tracing the little girl's braids as chaos unfolded. For her, it wasn't victory, it was closure. Pride had killed itself without her lifting a hand. As Tasha was wheeled out of the courtroom, cameras clicked wildly. Someone shouted, "Madam Kosi, are you happy now?" She turned slightly, her voice calm, almost sorrowful. "No," she said. "Happiness doesn't live in ruins." That line trended online for days. But Kosi didn't read the news. She only cared about the child in her arms, the one piece of innocence she had managed to save from the wreckage. When the final verdict came a week later, it felt less like a judgment and more like prophecy fulfilled. The courtroom was quieter this time. No reporters shouting, no gossiping whispers, only the steady voice of the judge reading what everyone already knew. This court awards full custody of the minor child, Mira Alade, to Mrs. Kosi Alade. All properties and business shares registered under her name shall remain so. The petitioner is granted visitation rights under discretion. Each sentence landed like a nail in Remy's pride. He sat motionless, his face hollow. Tasha was not in attendance. She was said to be recovering privately, avoiding the public eye. Kosi didn't gloat. She simply nodded in acknowledgement, as if this was not triumph but liberation. Afterward, outside the court, the sky opened up and rain began to fall, heavy, unrelenting Lagos rain, drenching everyone. Kosi didn't run for shelter. She stood under it, her hair soaked, her daughter's laughter echoing through the chaos. "Mummy, we're getting wet." Mira giggled, holding out her hands. Kosi smiled, her tears mixing with rain. "It's okay, baby. This rain is washing everything old away." Nearby, Remy stood by his car, watching them. He wanted to call out, but no words came. Pride held his tongue. Guilt held his heart. For the first time, he saw his wife, not as the quiet woman he had dismissed, but as the force of grace he could never compete with. That night back home, Kosi packed away her court clothes and tucked the brown envelope safely into a drawer labeled Myra's future. She sat by her window, watching the city lights blur through the rain, and whispered, "It's done." Mira came running in, wearing her pajamas, holding a picture she had drawn, 3 stick figures under the sun, holding hands. "It's us, Mummy," she said proudly. Kosi smiled faintly. "It's beautiful, my love." She kissed Myra's forehead, and as her daughter ran off to bed, she exhaled deeply, not as a woman who had won, but as one who had survived without losing her soul. When Remy left the courthouse that afternoon, the noise of reporters faded behind him, swallowed by the sound of Lagos traffic. He drove aimlessly through the city, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him from dissolving. The arrogance that once filled his chest had drained out, leaving a strange hollowness that no apology could fix. At a red light, he caught his reflection in the rear-view mirror and barely recognized the man staring back, eyes sunken, beard uneven, pride stripped bare. The streets blurred past like scenes from another life. The small cafe where he and Kosi used to share meat pies, the printing office she helped him rent when they had nothing. Every corner whispered reminders of what his hands had built and what his pride had burned down. By evening, the sky had turned a dusky gray, and rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops that mirrored his thoughts. He parked near their old home, the same one he'd once boasted about on magazine covers as proof of success. Through the half-open gate, he saw lights flickering in the living room. Kosi was there, helping Mira with homework. From where he sat, they looked like a picture he could never frame again. Gentle, complete, untouchable. He wanted to get out, to knock, to say sorry in a way that made sense, but guilt kept him glued to the seat. Myra's small laughter floated through the open window, and he felt his throat tighten. That laughter, once his favorite sound, now hurt like memory. He whispered, "That should have been me," inside. The rain thickened, the world blurred, and in that haze, he understood that the punishment for betrayal isn't always loss. Sometimes it's survival with regret. He didn't drive home immediately. He just sat there, headlights off, letting the rain wash over the car. At one point, he reached for his phone to call Kosi, but his fingers froze. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he missed her? That the empire he built without her hands now felt like a prison? None of those words could bridge the silence he had built brick by brick. When he finally started the engine and drove away, the sound of Myra's laughter still echoed in his ears, the kind of echo that follows a man into his dreams. Tasha's downfall came quietly, not with flames, but with exhaustion. After the courtroom humiliation, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, calls from gossip blogs, texts from friends pretending to care, and strangers hurling insults. Sidechick gets karma, one headline read. Another, pregnant mistress collapses in court. She stopped opening the internet altogether. The few friends who had encouraged her to flaunt her relationship now distanced themselves, afraid of public ridicule. She sat for days in the small apartment she once decorated with Remy's money, staring at the wall, her world shrinking by the hour. She called him several times, but he barely answered. When he did, his voice was flat. "I need space, Tasha." That was the same line he once used on Kosi. The irony didn't escape her. It just hurt differently. Weeks passed, and the silence between them grew colder. The baby, once her symbol of victory, became her greatest weight. She suffered stress, constant nausea, and sleepless nights filled with nightmares of courtroom laughter. One night, She doubled over in pain, clutching her belly, and neighbors rushed her to the hospital. The doctor's expression said everything. The pregnancy was gone. She stared at the ceiling in disbelief, her mind empty. When she finally reached Remy, her voice cracked. "Remy, I lost the baby." His pause lasted too long. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and ended the call. She threw the phone against the wall, screaming until her voice broke. That night, she sat in the dark, realizing that she had become exactly what she once mocked, a woman holding ashes, mistaking them for gold. After that, she disappeared from the city. No one knew where she went at first. Some said Port Harcourt, others whispered she'd gone abroad. But months later, an old friend spotted her working quietly in a small hair boutique, wearing simple clothes and avoiding cameras. When asked about Remy, she only said, "He was never mine to keep." The bitterness was gone, replaced by a fragile kind of humility. Sometimes life doesn't destroy us with noise. It humbles us in silence, until even pride forgets our name. The empire Remy once ruled began to crumble faster than he could salvage it. Clients withdrew their contracts. Partners cut ties. The company accounts were frozen under the legal restructuring that placed ownership firmly in Kosi's name. He tried to act strong, telling colleagues he was taking time off, but everyone could see the unraveling. His phone, once buzzing with invitations and praise, became a tomb of unanswered messages. At night, he sat in his now quiet apartment, nursing a half-empty bottle of whiskey, watching the city lights blink outside like judgmental eyes. He hadn't seen Tasha in months, hadn't heard from his daughter in weeks, and hadn't smiled since the verdict. Pride had turned into a ghost that haunted him in daylight. Sometimes, he parked near Kosi's neighborhood just to see Mira walking to school. She had grown taller. She still held her mother's hand, her backpack bouncing as she skipped. Once, she spotted him through the car window and waved enthusiastically. Panic gripped him. He ducked down like a criminal. Shame, heavier than guilt, pressed against his chest. That night, he dreamed of Mira running to him, saying, "Daddy, will you stay this time?" and waking up before he could answer. The next morning, he wrote those words down on a scrap of paper and slipped it into his wallet. Like a confession, he was too cowardly to speak aloud. Days blurred into weeks. He tried to call Kosi once, but hung up after the first ring. He'd tell himself, tomorrow. But tomorrow always arrived with the same cowardice. He started attending church again, sitting quietly in the back pew, never taking communion, just listening. He didn't know if he was seeking forgiveness or companionship. Sometimes he'd imagine Kosi sitting beside him again, Mira asleep in her arms. But when he blinked, the seat was always empty. Guilt, he learned, doesn't scream. It sits beside you quietly and never leaves. One warm Saturday afternoon, when the jacaranda trees along the road had begun to bloom purple again, Remy finally gathered the courage to call. His voice trembled when Kosi answered. "Please," he said, "let me see Mira." There was a long pause on the line. Her voice, when it came, was calm but wary. "It's been a long time, Remy." "I know," he whispered. "Just once. For her." She agreed hesitantly. That evening, he arrived at their gate carrying a small stuffed toy he had bought months earlier but never delivered. Mira ran out before Kosi could stop her. "Daddy," she shouted, throwing herself into his arms. For a moment, time rewound. Her laughter filled the compound, and Kosi's eyes softened, not with love, but with pity. They sat on the porch together, an awkward silence between them. Remy looked at Mira as if memorizing her face. "You've grown," he said. "You don't forget birthdays anymore," she teased innocently, making both adults freeze. He smiled sadly. "You're right, baby. I'll never forget again." As the sun began to set, Kosi stood, signaling it was time to leave. Mira clung to her father's leg. "Will you stay this time?" she asked softly. The question broke him. He forced a smile, his voice cracking. "I'll never leave again," he said. Kosi watched him carefully. She could tell something in his tone wasn't promise. It was farewell. He handed Mira the toy and whispered, "Be good for Mummy, okay?" Mira nodded, unaware that she was saying goodbye. That night, Kosi couldn't sleep. She replayed his words, his tone, the look in his eyes, a strange peace she hadn't seen in years. Around midnight, she found herself whispering a prayer she hadn't said since their early marriage. God, whatever he's carrying, help him lay it down. She didn't know that at that exact moment, Remy was parked in his car on a quiet street, staring at a blank sheet of paper, pen trembling in his hand, writing the last words he'd ever say. 3 days later, a knock came at Kosey's door. When she opened it, 2 police officers stood there, hats in hand. "Ma," one said gently, "we're sorry. Mr. Remy, Alade was found in his vehicle early this morning. It appears he didn't finish." She didn't need him to. The words hit like slow thunder. Mira, peeking from behind her, clutched her mother's gown. "Mummy, what's happening?" Kosey whispered, "Go inside, baby." The officers handed her a small envelope they had found in his car. On the front, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "For Kosey." Inside was a short letter, stained at the edges as if touched by rain or tears. "Kosey, you were never my weakness. You were my second chance. I lost myself trying to prove I didn't need you. Tell Mira, her father finally found peace. Thank you for giving me everything, even when I deserved nothing, Remy." Kosey sank onto the couch, the paper trembling in her hands. The room spun. Memories flashed, the laughter, the betrayal, the courtroom, the rain. It all led to this silence. Tears came, not of anger, but of mourning, not for the man he became, but for the one he could have remained. Mira stood by the doorway, her small voice breaking the stillness. "Mummy, is Daddy still settling something?" Kosey pulled her close, hugging her so tightly the child could feel her heartbeat. "Yes, baby," she whispered through tears, but this time he settled it with God. Weeks later, the letter was framed and placed inside Myra's Light Foundation, the women's legal support fund Kosey had started. On the wall beside it hung one of Myra's drawings, 3 figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Visitors often asked why the 3rd figure was smiling. Kosey would answer softly, "Because even mistakes can find peace when forgiveness arrives." And every night, when she tucked Mira into bed, she looked out the window at the stars and whispered, "Rest now, Remy. The lesson is learned." The city outside moved on, but in that quiet house, love and loss coexisted, not as enemies, but as proof that dignity survives even the loudest heartbreak. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.